touched on this because it hasn't really gotten much attention this week in the news, but it also, I think, in some way implicates this piece by Peter Beinart in the Daily Beast, which I think is an interesting piece and sort of reflects a little bit of what I said about I've been saying about the De Blasio win. We don't know, will Bill De Blasio be the guy that we all want him to be, but at very least, it sort of indicates a change in the perspective of
a
the way
changing
people
of
vote.
the guard. Yeah, I want to say I'd read this piece, I'd marked this piece off to read, and I certainly don't always agree with Peter Beinart, but I think it's one of the smartest things I've seen him write. I happen to hold an opinion very close to this. Maybe that's why I think it's so smart, because
Right.
it's my opinion.
That's the way we all operate, isn't it? I mean,
I'm very modest that way.
But give people a sense of what the piece is about.
That basically that we all and I think there's so much truth to this. He talked about sort of the difference in how political generations versus sort of demographers' generations. You have the boomers who are mid 40s to mid 60s. You've got you've got Generation X, which is where you and I both hail from, mid 60s to early 80s, and then the Millennials, early 80s to 2000s.
And that's when the years you were born. Not I want to make it clear, you and I are not between the ages of 60s, mid 60s, and mid 80s.
Well, I'm like that Benjamin Button guy. I just keep getting younger. But yes, thank you for, as usual, clarifying my idiocy, Sam, or at least my lack of pointing out the backstory. So and to move it along quickly, essentially, instead of breaking it up that way, Beinart's point is that it's political, it's disruptions, economic disruptions or terrorist attack, big things that disrupt the way we look at things politically, that shape political generations. And essentially, from the 80s of Reagan through the 90s of Clinton, we were all operating within the same framework. And those of us who came of age during that time, mostly, and voted. And when they explain coming of age to them, it's kind of when you head off to college, or when you're in your teens, and start paying attention to these things, to when you sort of become, move out on your own and start having sort of what one might call it more stable life, where you're trying to, during that time, opinions change a lot. Once you get more settled, they calcify, and you've got the mortgage to pay and things to do, and and the rest. And I think there's a lot to be said for that too. And so his point is that that De Blasio is the rise of the new left, which is the coming of age of the millennials, who have basically come of age during a period of time where you've had those great recession, a couple economic dislocations during the Bush years, and eventually, obviously, the huge one at the end, where the government safety net has been destroyed, essentially, is threadbare. Jobs are hard to come by. They've seen disastrous war in front of their eyes, and so they, on a number of these issues, particularly economic issues and the rest, are more to the left. The point being that didn't always mean in the past that you'd be on the left, because the right would use right-wing economic populism, and they still do, of course, to try to bring some people that naturally would be more economically left to their side, and they would play on resentments, whether it's racial or homophobia or whatever it is. But because the younger generation is so much more urban, suburban, so much more mixed race, so much more people know people. Obviously, if they're not gay, they are friends with people who are gay, and so it's become something where that it's just not nearly as effective on millennials as it was in the past, because you're so much more often around people. And you and I have had that conversation before. I think about gay rights, where I knew people who were gay, but it's not, growing up when I was in high school, but it wasn't the sort of ubiquitous, everywhere that it is now and is accepted. And so they're breaking the Reagan-Clinton framework. And I've always felt, my theory on this that I've given for a while, watching what Obama's done and whatever, history doesn't always repeat itself, exactly, and I don't know that it's going to, but my thing has always been is that, Clinton was operating in the Reagan framework. Clinton was sort of our Eisenhower. You know what I mean? He was a moderate who you know, way Eisenhower was acting within the New Deal consensus.
Right.
He was, was a moderate from the other party. That's what Clinton was. Nixon was the guy that started governing somewhat more outside of it, but all of his appeals, public appeals, were, in his mind, it was still, he said we're all Keynesians, and he said a whole bunch of things, to prove that he was still operating in the sort of framework of the New Deal. So you had to, but he was building this growing conservative coalition around him while still sort of operating within that framework.
Right.
That to me is Obama, who has been building
but now,
this coalition.
just make something clear.
Still,
You're talking about it's sort of the mirror image.
I am, and I'm saying history doesn't always repeat itself that way. I don't know that it is, but to me, what is similar about this is that it takes a certain period of time for people for those in whatever establishment exists to open their eyes and be like, we are now operating in a new framework and things have changed. And there's and there've been a lot of examples from the votes to now in favor of gay marriage statewide, to the voting openly gay people to Congress, to the fact that whatever you think of some of his politics, Cory Booker is going to clean up in New Jersey and he's African American, and 20 years ago that would have been a much bigger deal, and now it's not. We're in sort of the legalization of pot in a couple states, and now it's going to happen in more. We're just in a very different atmosphere right now, and so Obama's been benefiting from this coalition the way Nixon was doing the Southern strategy and benefiting from a conservative coalition, but he was still governing, ironically, more to the left, the way Obama is still governing, to me, as a centrist and sometimes center-right on a lot of things. And so I think the field is set for the next person in line who sees this new left as this rising force, and more are going to be able to vote, right, in 2016 and 2020, and is willing to take hold of it and realizes, and I think whether that's Hillary Clinton or Elizabeth Warren, who's already gotten the message, or others, to see that's where a large new left and left center, and really even center coalition can be built, because the vast majority of people, frankly, are with us in almost on all these issues now. On the other side, it's a dying, angry, white, rural, largely male, certainly patriarchal, society that is losing numbers in this country.
I think your comparison of the Nixon and Obama is really astute in some ways. I mean, and people should be clear on what we're talking about here. It is a transitional figure who is still operating and talking as still providing some fealty to the pre-existing sort of framework, and under Nixon's era, he was still sort of operating in. He
created the EPA, right?
Yeah,
he was doing these very progressive. I'll let you continue.
New Deal, still sort of like operating under the New Deal spectrum, or the New Deal, I guess, framework. When Reagan came in and then began to demonize government, essentially sort of doing a 180 there, and maybe to a certain extent, I'm not convinced that Carter didn't change that too, in some ways, in some fashion, but basically, turning against labor.
That's a great point. It started actually, ironically, with Carter. That's a great point.
And sort of saying, okay, you know what, we're now responding to the New Deal in some respect, and to the rise of labor, and to the strength of the middle class, and now
even the rise of the evangelical right started with Carter.
Yes.
He was the first born again, and so that's a great point you make, Sam. Is that you can't just think about it in terms of parties. You think about it in terms of the representation of whoever the people are.
Indeed.
And Carter was the representation of this new rising force. The way Obama is this half black, half white, whatever we're calling that these days. But he's certainly multi-ethnic, younger, all that well-educated, lived in the cities, represents this coalition, but is still operating in the framework of, government is bad, we need to cut spending, and all these other things that millennials don't accept as truth, as polling will show you.
And that's what's fascinating too. I mean, I think that's a great point. That you're raising is sort of like the rise of sort of the cultural. If you divide these politics into sort of cultural issues, emancipation issues, and the economics. One sort of acts as a ballast against the other. And in this instance, I think Occupy is not necessarily the movement that we wanted it to be, but it was indicative in the same way that I think this De Blasio win is indicative of something that has changed.
And Garcetti in Los Angeles, I think
Warren in Warren in
Yep.
Massachusetts, because she was a national figure running in Massachusetts there, and I think this is an indication of a change, particularly among the millennials. I mean, I think there are some of us who sort of even though we were raised under the came of age under the Reagan era, who continued to sort of have this notion that government is not generically a problem. You can have a problem with certain government policies, but the existence of government can be a force for good. This was something that was completely rejected by Reagan, and still, in that rejection.
And even Clintonism was, use the government, but use it in a way to provide incentives.
Yes,
right?
But he also
not big government programs.
He came in and said the era
credit.
of big government is over. I mean, that is a meaningless. That means nothing other than falling within that framework of government. Generically speaking, is problematic if it's too involved in things.
Exactly.
And you have millennials who are now saying that, we need the government because we are now seeing the implications of what happens.
Well, there's no jobs out there for us. You're cutting, virtually all of the social safety net that was there before.
Deregulation brought us this massive financial crisis.
They're the first generation who thinks, one of the aspects of that Peter Byner piece. They are the first generation, I think, would agree with probably things that you and I would say, and others listening to this show, which is that corporations have more control over their lives than government.
Right.
I mean, that's a key data point.
And they
in the argument.
Also, there's a plurality of them that say that they are more in favor of socialism than capitalism. And
that's one of the most interesting ones. Is that's been a dirty word now for the better part of 60 years. And certainly during the era when I was in college and whatever, you just weren't going. I mean, to be called a socialist, was an insult. And it's kind of fun now, even to be called a liberal was back then. And it's kind of fun now to watch as these older Republicans, these old white men, don't get it, that they still throw around these stupid terms and think that they're, especially when they call somebody a liberal, and you're like, yeah, damn right I am.
Right.
Let's talk about that. What we've, and they don't see that that's changed. And I think I'm not making excuses here for Obama and Clinton, although I have often said that I think there's a lot of anger at times on the left for Clinton, and it may be because I I got into politics with him in his reelection in '96, but I always said that I think, there was no left radio, there was no Media Matters, there was no, people like Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, there was no blogosphere, there was nothing except for the stuff coming from the right. And Fox News was brought on then, and I feel like he thought he was operating in that atmosphere, but the truth was he really was.
Well, that's true. But he also, look, I don't want to get into a fight about Clinton, but he was the head of the DLC. I mean,
he was, and it doesn't mean I say he
represented exactly the sort of forces where the Democratic Party said, to be relevant, what we need to do is bring in a lot of corporate money. And that was a decision that I think, was we are going to – it is better to win as Republican light than to lose.
And let me – and I want to be clear because I've been very critical. I mean,
Democrat.
Right. I've been very critical. I mean, look, the elimination of Glass-Steagall was one of the biggest policy mistakes, disasters of the last, generation.
Telecommunications Act wasn't so great either.
The telecommunications bill was terrible. NAFTA was terrible. So I don't want welfare reform, terrible.
Right.
So I don't want to pretend that I haven't been critical of Clinton. I have been. The only reason why when someone on the left will say, well, he's a terrible president, I often try to point out that in this assault, that was going on where Democrats, nobody believed a Democrat could win the presidency anymore, and the left was being hammered and the rest, some things like the Family Medical Leave Act and the Earned Income Tax Credit and some of the environmental stuff, there was some good in there. And again, I'm not making excuses. There was a lot of bad. With Obama, I've been very critical because I feel like, to me, and maybe it's just Obama is whatever he is, 11, 12 years older than me and can't see it, but to me, a lot of that changing landscape, especially with the media having changed somewhat, is more evident and should be. But it seems like he still, feels this need to adhere to the former sort of
Well, I think
framework.
fundamentally that's who he is. I mean, I think that's fundamentally who he is. I don't think for him it's about triangulation as much as I think he's doing what he thinks is what needs to be done. And I just happen to think that he's on a page that is more akin to, I mean, the irony is that, he's George Herbert Walker Bush in some ways. And George Herbert Walker Bush was cutting against the tide of that sort of that where the Republican Party was at that point.
Right.
And Obama is, in some way, sort of somewhere where George Herbert Walker Bush was, but at a time where the tide is shifting the other direction. And as a Democrat, I think he's.
I think I agree with that somewhat. My only issue with all that is I think sometimes people simplify it, and there've been these two. There've been the two crowds that jump out there that call each other names, and I don't use either of them because I think it's stupid. Whether it's the Obama bot or emo Prague or whatever, where these people are fighting each other on that. And my view is a more nuanced one, which is I think there's no doubt Obama has a strong fealty to Wall Street and a lot of the values that come from sort of a more corporate Democratic Party, while at the same time he's caved on some things, and there are things that I think he would have done that would be in a more progressive direction, except for he doesn't have the confidence in himself, so he turns to the Geithners and Summers and people that he thinks are the serious people that know better than he does, and doesn't fight on things. Like, my guess is, if he could, he'd raise the minimum wage a lot more. Right. But he doesn't have the courage to stand up and fight for that. I mean, that just being an example. So I don't, I definitely agree with a lot of that analysis. He's a guy who's in with the Wall Street crowd, and is in that, and that's why I made that argument to begin with, which is he sees that framework, he's part of that, that's the way he sees the world. But I do think around the edges there's some more liberal things he would do economically here and there if he could, and he just, for example, I think the stimulus would have been bigger if he could have, but people who he thought knew better than him said no, and so the answer became no. And I think there's something to that.
But more, and again, the interesting thing about this piece is that it's more about the people than the politicians. The politicians are just a reflection in some way of what is changing on the ground. And by 2016, millennials are going to make up about a third of the electorate. And they seem to be overwhelmingly a group of people who perceive government as, while they're skeptical of it, I think rightly so, they're skeptical, it seems to me, of certain policies as a vehicle for delivering what they think should be done. I think it's quite clear that millennials expect more out of government.
Right. And I think there's a comparison there, and that's why I brought up that data point earlier, which is, can government do some bad things? Can the NSA? Can others? Most certainly. But can government also be a force for good? And should we be more worried about government than we should be about corporations? I think we know where obviously from polling we know where millennials come down on that, and that's what's changed. And I just think that these forces are only growing. The Hispanic population, I mean, we've gone through all this stuff, the demographics that have already changed. Virginia, Florida, North Carolina are in the process right now of changing everywhere from Georgia to Texas to Arizona to even South Carolina. And, this is and that's why, again, this is not to try to make history reflect itself too perfectly. It could happen, it could not happen. I'm just saying the field is there. The people, the sort of ideology is there for among millennials. The platform is there. Everything is there for whoever the next person is to run and take advantage of all this. And when people say, "Oh, well, Hillary Clinton's tied to the old stuff and whatever," maybe, and maybe she won't be smart enough to see it and grab it. I'm doing a straight political analysis here now, nothing to do with my thoughts on her, positive or negative. She bought into that framework too. She was always considered one of the more progressive people when she was a first lady early on. And later on, not so much, obviously, for a variety of good reasons, like supporting Iraq and other things. But people need to remember in the 60s, when he was governor of California, Reagan was somebody who signed one of the most liberal abortion laws in the country. Reagan was partially shaped and went with forces, was a conservative, but probably also saw some of the writing on the wall and what was going on in the mid to late 70s.
Right.
Can Hillary Clinton see that and go back to, if it is her roots, or just alter and become, grab this generation and run with it and become a progressive hero? I don't think because of something you've done in the past you can't do that. But listen, if she's not smart enough to, there are a whole lot of other people coming up, from the Castro brothers in Texas to Elizabeth Warren to now De Blasio in New York and people like that do get it. And they'll be the rising tide of the party in the future. And frankly, I think our politics. I hope, there are always things that can change things. I think 9/11 set back some of what was already happening a certain number of years. Mm-hmm. But I think it's inevitable that it's not inevitable that Democrats will win and be smart enough if somehow Republicans got smart enough, although that's harder to believe right now. What's inevitable, I think, is our politics is going to move in that way, and the question is who will take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. In some respects, I can't wait till September 13, 2023 to see how this plays out. And then I think, God, my kid is only going to be 10 years old, my youngest kid.
I know.
I'm still going to be mired in, doing all the I'm not, when am I going to get my life back?
You could be a young, strapping 50-something, Sam. Yeah. Obviously in sort of Joe Piscopo kind of shape.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll be saying, what am I have to work, though, for the next 35 years. Because there's lifespan is now to 125, and Social Security is cut off at the age of 66.
I think, I'll tell you something. I really think that in the next 5 years, it's very possible we will see Social Security expanded. And I think that's going to be, I think that is going to be a big...
I do too, by the way. I want to be clear that I'm joking, which I think that was clear. But
right, yes.
I actually think that
I think everybody knew you were joking when the implication was I was going to get in shape over the next 10 years.
That started off the joke?
Yeah, I think people knew that's where...
I mean, basically, I think that they had their chance, the crowd that wanted to cut Social Security. They made their, their strongest, I put that in quotes, arguments, and they've lost. And so I agree with you. I think, if anything, it's going to be expanded, which is a very, very, very good news.
Yeah. Well, Cliff, fascinating stuff, and really great point about the sort of the way that Nixon was also sort of that transitional figure in some respects.
Right. I mean, you have to look at Nixon for what he did and take the parts out of Watergate and the other stuff, because that's not relevant to the conversation of, where he was in the history of the movement. And he saw that rising coalition and appealed to it, on the right, but at the same time, he still was adhering to the old way of thinking, right, which was, government involvement in the economy, came to a point where, he had wage and price controls. I imagine what Republicans would do if even a Democrat went anywhere near that today. And that's so really, he actually, policy-wise, was pretty far to the left. And that's kind of where I feel like Obama is now, someone who's taken advantage of the rising multi-ethnic, multicultural, urban,
what's happening
suburban,
socially, right.
But at the same time has still, particularly on economics,
Well, that's what Nixon did, right? I mean, he maintained the sort of the economic framework, or at least working within that, but really juiced the whole social upheaval.
That's a great point.
And
it really is an exact opposite in that way,
Yeah,
which is Obama's used the social liberalism to win over all sorts of groups and kept within the economic framework. And so it's up to the next Democrat, whoever he or she may be, to see that there is huge potential here.
right, to leverage
be a transformational figure.
To leverage what has been gained or from the Republican, sort of the reactionary side, lost in terms of culturally speaking, and leverage that to deliver what this generation is looking for from government from an economic perspective.